more than that, focusing on prevention, which is reducing the loads, doing a good vaccination, knowing which strains are floating around and causing disease, trying to check your vaccination crew, trying to apply the vaccine twice, and then taking a look and educating your people. I mean, that would be prime.
Welcome to the Poultry Podcast Show. This is Karen Grogan. I'll be your host today. And with me is Dr. Rodrigo Gallardo from the University of California at Davis. Welcome to the show, Rodrigo.
Hi, Karen. How are you? Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. It's great to have you with us. Rodrigo is part of the College of Veterinary Medicine there. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got to your role currently at UC Davis and what your educational background is?
Well, that's interesting because I always tell people that it's a bad habit in my family. So I have my grandfather is a poultry vet, my father is a poultry vet, and I'm a poultry vet. So it's been 3 generations floating around.
And specifically, I run across a lot of people that are veterinarians, but specifically poultry vets.
Specifically poultry. So I grew up inside the barn like most of our fellow colleagues. And then my dad actually and my grandfather too, they were faculty at the University of Chile. I'm originally from South America. And they also did research, very applied, right? Because they went to the field, grabbed some samples, then came back to the lab and they did some applied research, and they contributed to the poultry industry in my country, in Chile, that way. So that's been my motto actually during the 11 years that I've been here in Davis. So I like a lot the interaction with the industry. Usually my research is focused on problems that are daily problems in terms of animal health, and that's how I like it. So in terms of education, I did my DVM in Chile, worked for 7 years in Highland International back in Chile. I was in charge of the reproduction and the hatchery. Then I came to the US, did my PhD in molecular virology with Dr. Toro in Auburn, and then I took my board examination, and after that I just got this position in Davis. So my job description here says 50% teaching, 50% research. In reality, what happens here is that my position gets funded in half by the poultry industry in California. So I have to do a fair amount of outreach and what we call tech services in poultry, right? So there's a lot of interaction with the industry, and I have to do basic and applied research too. So
that's great. That's what our land grant institutions are for. We work pretty similarly at UGA, and our positions are heavy service based too. So we are in parallel universes in terms of our university appointments. So in terms of your area of research, California is, its own little, ecosystem there in the valley in terms of turkey and chickens and squab and layers, and you have all kinds of species mixed together there in California. So what are the top areas for your research right now?
So, well, it depends, right? But throughout times, I've focused on IBV, which is, job security in a certain sense. So it's endemic everywhere.
Yeah.
Even though we don't have many problems with IBV, it's super interesting to take advantage of that, right? So here the approach is not just massively vaccinate, but rather vaccinate whenever you need, at least in broilers. In layers, we have programs that are more similar to what you see in the East Coast. But in broilers, during the summer, we don't really vaccinate. Looking at the trends that happen with surveillance is super interesting in order to learn how the virus mutates and changes. That's the topic that I research for my PhD program, for example. I mean, we looked at viral evolution with IBV. And then, so we also work on Coryza, right? Coryza is of course, more a layered disease, but and from temperate weather. So we see it a lot in layers, and it's endemic here. But during the last probably 5 to 6 years, we've seen it in broilers, and since you cannot vaccinate, you cannot do anything. They die like crazy.
Yeah, I've seen coryza and broilers in South Georgia. They were close to the sickest broilers I think of. Yeah, they had MG and coryza thanks to some backyard
Yeah,
chickens. That
there you
yeah,
go. And
yeah,
that's actually the reason, right? I mean, we have a lot of backyard flocks and a lot of game fowl. So coryza is also floating around because of this capacity that it has to create carriers. And then the other topic that we focus on is reoviruses. So again, and that super endemic in the broiler industry. And then like probably 11, 12 years ago, when these big reovirus outbreaks started because of the variants, we started researching it, and with the help of our friends from foster farms. Uh, I like to see at data, try to see trends. We do changes on those vaccines very periodically, like every 6 months or a year. So we have a good grip of what's going on in terms of variants and how to prevent them. But also, we've been looking into the virus itself and trying to see if there's antigenic determinants, right? It's a very complex virus, so it's super interesting on the basic and applied side of things.
so you stay busy with your 50% research.
Yeah. Well,
There's
like they sum up, they add up 100%, but it's never 100%,
right.
right?
No,
So you need to have
it's
clear in your mind.
150%.
Yeah, you have to have clear in your mind that you have a family and there's people waiting for you every day. So
Right, right.
so I mean, I try to work from 8 to 5 and try not to work over the weekends, and so far
Uh,
that's working, but sometimes it
yeah.
doesn't.
You have to establish some boundaries. No doubt. If you want any semblance of balance, you have to, have some hard and fast rules. Otherwise, the balance erodes very quickly. So I think coryza is a good place for us to start in terms of your area of expertise. Those of us in the U.S. have seen coryza sort of spread to areas that we didn't really probably expect coryza to land, especially in layer production facilities. So let's rewind, because we may have listeners that you know just cover the basics a little bit. So what's the bacterium? What's unique about it? You talked about established carrier states. Like, how did we get at this in the Midwest and other states?
Yeah. So again, I was trained as a molecular virologist, right? So working on coryza was
You're
kind
working
of
on
like a surprise
bacteria.
for me. So I had a delegation from the industry one time contacted me and coming here to my office actually, and they told me like we have a huge problem with coryza, and I go like, well, that's great, but I'm a virologist, and they go
I'm
like,
not a
well,
microbiologist.
but you're a researcher and a veterinarian, so you need to work on the bacteria. So that's how I ended up working on coryza. So it's a bacterial disease, of course, and it's caused by the bacteria called Avibacterium paragallinarum, which used to be called Haemophilus, right, back in the day, and still people calls it Haemophilus. Uh, it's a weird bacteria because it takes some effort to grow, right? I mean, in the lab, whenever you're doing your diagnostics, it just doesn't grow in common media. You need to use chocolate agar, and sometimes, we do some other tricks here too. We add to that chocolate agar some chicken serum, or we in addition to the NAD that agar might have. I mean, we streak staph on top of it. So you need to grow it in a certain way. The problem though is that in this latest outbreak, this bacteria has been changing. And what we've seen through some research and genotyping specifically is that we have, that most of the vaccines that we have available commercially, which are from types A, B, and C, uh, the C types, which are the most prevalent around the US, doesn't really look like the strains from the vaccines. So, I mean, and I don't want to confuse people. The vaccines do work, right? If you apply them twice, the problem is that you're getting more of the cross protection rather than the full protection from a vaccine, which is what you aim. So if you apply the vaccine wrongly, or you don't really do a good job in the application, you're subject to more problems than if you were using exactly the same vaccine. So that's one of the reasons why this thing is spreading, I think. And of course, there's been weather changes all over the place, right? So that also means that the average temperature in the Midwest is not the same that we used to have, and that makes this bacteria survive a longer period of time. So I probably went off topic from your
No, not at
question,
all. No.
but that's what I think it's going on. That there's things that we're doing differently. And for example, here in California, one of the big things that we started doing differently 10 years ago was cage free. Right? So cage free in multiple age complexes is terrible in terms of respiratory diseases. And usually in chickens, you know this better than me. I mean, diseases are multifactorial, right? So you have an
No,
immunosuppression.
Rodrigo, it's just one disease. No, I'm kidding. And it's just a disease. They want to know what the one disease is.
So you have one immunosuppression, and then on top of
Right.
that, you have bacterial diseases, viral diseases, and all gets complex. And the lab says IBV, but it might be ORT, and So like our Bible book says, like the art of looking at the tree or the forest rather than the trees. Well, this is one of those situations.
Cage free. So for the people in the rest of the world, California does have legislation, state legislation that regulates that is mandatory in terms of rearing laying chickens there now. So in terms of that, so the cage free creates sort of, at least in our experience, a lot of environmental issues, more stress in terms of getting to feed and water. They just don't necessarily adapt. So how does that additional stress feed into our disease challenges?
Well, I mean, as I said before, it's all multifactorial, right? So there's a lot of management in disease events in poultry, especially when you have cage free, right? I mean, you have an environment which is inherently difficult to ventilate, right? So you have ammonia and you have dust, right? And with dust, there's E. coli and other bacteria that are in suspension. And then you have most of the times challenges with vaccination, right? I mean, you're vaccinating against IBV, but then you have a rolling reaction because your job wasn't properly done. And, all these mixes, there's a mixing vessel, and then you end up with a pathology that might look like coryza, but the underlying cause is something different. So I've seen different flavors of coryza in the field, right? I mean, I've seen it with IBV, I've seen it with E. coli. That's why whenever you apply your E. coli vaccine, it seems to work for coryza, right?
Yeah, because you're controlling an underlying
Yeah. And
stressor.
then I've seen it with pox. So I had a producer some time ago that contacted me and asked me to go and visit their farm, and he said, like, we have the most severe coryza that I've ever seen. I entered to the barn, and there's swollen faces, but then
Mm-hmm.
on top of that there's crusty lesions.
Uh,
So we look at the vaccination program, and of course they did a lousy job on applying the AE pox. They didn't have titers for AE, so of course pox didn't take either,
right. No
and
takes.
they had coryza. So again, I mean, this thing is much more complex than what we really study whenever we go to school and we study about these diseases.
Right. There it's usually not just the one thing, but self layers are never straightforward. Um in terms of you know prevention and treatment and management of sort of if coryza becomes endemic, like into a large layer complex, you had briefly mentioned that your research showed that you're getting more cross protection, not full protection, because what's commercially out there, the C's don't quite line up. um, are there things in the pipeline? Do you see people leaning more towards autogenous, actually having their isolate being made into a product and being used, and then that's being more successful?
Yeah, I see a little bit of everything. So there's producers here in the West Coast that use the autogenous with really great success. So they have really good results, and things go smoothly with them. There's others that use autogenous vaccines and they still have issues. Um, I do a fair amount also of vaccine audits, and I can tell you that sometimes whatever we think it's immunization is not right. I mean, I see people vaccinating and not really doing a good job. So there's a lot that we have to do as veterinarians and and people that work in animal health in order to train the people that does vaccination. Um, there's also some other things that I've seen that are pretty strange, and still don't have a good idea of why. So I started, and probably my vaccine company colleagues will not be happy with this, but I started breaking emulsions of different vaccines and retrieving the bacteria and trying to look at it by electron microscope and see how were their shapes, if they were destroyed and stuff. I did the same thing with formalin inactivated and just live bacteria, and we found out that due to the formalin inactivation, some bacteria lost its capsid, right, or membranes. So that might be a reason of why some vaccines are better than others. And then also some vaccines of certain types or brands uh, were able to preserve the shape of the bacteria in a better way. You saw less broken bacteria and more preserved bacteria in some others. So I guess there's also this idyllic idea that the autogenous vaccine is just the right for preventing the stuff that is happening in the field, but in reality, when you make an autogenous, there's a lot of things that don't happen compared than when there's a commercial vaccine produced, right? Commercial vaccines use isolates that are very studied, right?
Yes.
H18, Modesto strain, we know them, we know how they grow, we know how to grow them. These new strains, since they are a little bit different, they don't grow as well. You cannot take them to the titers that you want to take them. They are sometimes more finicky in order to work with them. They need certain other nutrients in order to be grown. They don't react well to the formalin. They don't react well to certain adjuvants. So there's a lot of things that happen there that we don't really have a good grip of. And again, I mean, there's vaccines and vaccines. I mean, that's the underlying thing, and we need to know what we're doing, but at the same time, we need to apply them well. So yeah, it's a tough topic.
Well, we have to talk about those topics because we do all think, oh, I'm going to make an autogenous that's going to work and work perfectly. But, the regulation, as you mentioned, autogenous products, you only have to prove safety. There's no work on the strain itself going into that. So they're definitely not a perfect match every time. Yeah, and each manufacturer does things a little differently, and I think that even with commercial products, I think that we see some of that, like the sort of growth curves and like sort of the right tighter amount of bacteria that gets included. Everything's a little different, and we see reactions and pullets from different products, and so oh, timely topic.
And also,
No,
you
I
have
think that's
vaccination programs,
great.
right? I mean, there's vaccination programs that are more loaded with vaccines than others. So, if you apply 4, 5, 6 different antigens at the same time, you don't. I mean, it's strange to think that the reaction will be the same than when you apply two antigens,
Yeah,
right?
correct,
And the route
correct.
of inoculation. I mean, there's lots of people that they like using the pectoral muscle, and the chickens take a hit, and all those things that we know.
Yeah, and especially in the layer business, everybody was down to one handling, and if you have Coryza come in, very well researched, you really need two doses, to get good protection, so that the egg industry is losing money to marginal, a majority of the time. So adding an extra handling is
Yeah, it's
less
tough
than
for them.
ideal. Yeah, it's tough for them.
And I still have producers that apply it once only.
Right.
So that's the reason. So part of, since we were talking about prevention on coryza, most of the people that I work with rely on the vaccine, right? But there's also management associated with the use of vaccines. So your vaccine will never make up for your poor biosecurity or your poor management. Um, Reducing the load in the field is super important, and that's when the second vaccine has an impact, right? When you apply one dose, you won't neutralize as much as when you apply two doses. That reduction of the bacteria in the field will allow your vaccine to work better compared with, and that's probably one of the reasons why this bacteria was able to increase its presence and produce more problems, right? There was a long time in which we use only one or no coryza vaccine. So we tend to forget about that, and then that that bacteria changed enough in order to cause problems, and the loads were such that we were not able to control it by vaccination. So you see, I go back to the viruses all the
Makes
time.
sense. Hey, it's your language. Virology is your language. You can't help yourself. It's okay. So, in terms of like, next steps in terms of your research in Coryza, do you have anything,
Yeah.
currently going
So
on right now?
always trying to simplify things, I guess. I mean, for poultry veterinarians in the field and people that doesn't really have to know all this, right? So one of the things that it's super important in terms of epidemiology and also to control these bacteria or bacterial infection is to know which type we're talking about, right? Are we talking about an A or a B or a C? Uh, right now, the process is super tedious and complicated. So in order um, to get into a sequence of the gene that it's necessary in order to do a genotyping, you have weeks of work.
It's
We
tedious
develop,
culture
yeah,
work. Yeah.
we develop genotyping strategies with several collaborators in the world, actually, and we actually wrote a paper that got published last week in Avian Pathology with our colleagues from Royal GD in the Netherlands, which we explained that genotyping. But again, it's super tedious and complicated. So we're working on a qPCR that it's able to do the same thing. So from something that takes weeks to something that takes a couple of hours, and we can probably inform people what type of coryza is affecting their flocks, and with that you can take decisions in terms of which vaccine to use and from where it came, and do I need to control more my biosecurity or not, that sort of thing.
That would be great. I remember when, things started happening several years ago, people were contacting us, do you type, and we were like, no. And I remember at the time, and I don't even think your lab was doing it, like it was, you had to figure out how to send isolates to Mexico to get it typed. So that wasn't all that long ago. So getting to the point where, we could have a qPCR, that would be great.
Yeah, and I remember, well, the gold standard still is serotyping, right? And for that you need to have a battery of hyperimmune sera or sera that can recognize your isolate. So
Right.
for that you need to work on coryza 24/7, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you need to have all the different types. And since this bacteria has changed, there were a lot of times in which it came back as untypable, or
Hmm.
it looks like an A, but it looks like a C too, right?
Right.
That doesn't help much.
No.
And you need to send them to Mexico or to Australia.
Right.
These are, like, I what I see is that they're understudied diseases. So this would be one of the understudied diseases in which we don't really have an expert in the U.S. The same would be with encephalomyelitis, right?
Oh, nobody. They're like old, oh yeah, we know what that is, and nobody they're not,
But then, I one time we saw here an outbreak of avian encephalomyelitis in pullets, 14-week-old pullets. That's super weird, right? I mean, it
and they
doesn't, it
had the
doesn't,
tremors and everything, like
yeah, with
neurologic
tremors,
sign.
with tremors. So they, well, I don't know why we're kind of like a magnet for understudied diseases. Maybe because
That's going to be the thing you're known for now.
Maybe because I say yes too much. But
Right.
anyhow, we grab the samples, we isolate the virus. I thought it was because the vaccine was too close to being, adapted to chickens. But anyhow, we figured out that it was a management problem in which people was actually applying the applicator of the pox AE vaccine into the muzzle, and
Oh, so
and
instead of
those,
putting it in an
yeah,
aberrant location in the wing web, you actually gave it to the chicken.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
It
giving it
needs
to
to
the
go in
chicken
the
through the
wrong
muzzle
place.
causes the disease, right?
Right.
But when you receive samples from someone in the field in your lab and you don't have the whole picture,
No.
it blocks you, right, from understanding what's going on. And that's why I always rely on going to the field, taking a look at what's going on and stuff.
It does make a difference. Makes a big difference than instead of just samples that come in. Or a lot of times what happens is we get a case in and then we're like, something isn't right here, and then it turns into a field visit for
Yeah,
us in terms of, okay, we're not seeing, again, for those of you that do submit to diagnostic labs, bring dead chickens and live chickens, like bring a representative sample. Because a lot of times, a lot of things, they'll just bring chickens and then they've missed what's happened without bringing the birds that have died that morning. You're not going to see the sample. So if we don't get a good representative sample, this is when that is critical. So then you really need to go out and see with your eyes to see
yeah,
what's
and a
going
good
on.
history, right? I mean, a
A
good.
good, oh, if I get one more, increased mortality. Well, how increased? And what was it? I need more information than just that. And then it's like, okay, is it really increased? Like, do I need to be testing for AI here? Like,
Yeah,
I need some more information. Yes, a good history and bring the right, population
or
is
sometimes you
critical.
receive livers.
Oh, right, right. And then so they send samples like that. That goes through like a different stream in our diagnostic lab. And then they get results, which sometimes is nothing. And then they call you and you're like, well, I'm going to have to look into that for you because it just went straight into histo, or it just went straight into virus isolation, or whatever you sent the samples for. So yeah, we get a lot of questions on things that we didn't even really have our hands in. And then in terms of in maybe the rest of the world, because we do have international listeners where antibiotic regulations would allow treatment. I think that that's pretty common in the rest of the world in terms of treating fox for coryza. And what products do you see there being useful?
Oof, in the rest of the world. So what I would say, I mean, I have the politically correct answer. So
I'm going to
so
dance around this.
yeah, so in general, like when I receive questions about how to treat or with what to treat, right? I always go back to send samples to the lab, get a good culture, and get an antibiotic resistance test. So we've seen here treating with some antibiotics that they don't work, right? And you ask most of my colleagues that work exclusively in the field, and they will tell you like, yeah, coryza lasts for 3 weeks without antibiotics, and it lasts for 3 weeks with antibiotics. So, so in general, I mean, we don't do much here. Other than I mean, there's actually we do things because there's good products that are natural and things that sometimes you might think that they don't work, but they have certain effects. So we use oreganols, we use all those things that are more supportive care, and they actually work. I mean, there's even some um, mucolytics that do a
Yes,
good job also.
like iodine and guaifenesin and
So those
use
we
supportive
use.
stuff.
In Latin America, what I've seen is that they use a lot of antibiotics and very high spectrum or wide spectrum antibiotics, and I would be careful with those because you need to save your tools to whenever you need them really well, right? And I've seen the same thing that it said here, like using for example bacterial to treat coryza,
Right.
right? It's kind of
Bad
like a
tool.
nuclear bomb, and it actually doesn't work all the time. So more than that, focusing on prevention, which is reducing the loads, doing a good vaccination, knowing which strains are floating around and causing disease, trying to check your vaccination crew, trying to apply the vaccine twice, and then taking a look and educating your people. I mean, that would be prime.
Definitely falls under those diseases of biosecurity.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, definitely falls under the things that get
And again,
carried
know your
around.
neighbors, right?
Right.
It's super important when you come up with biosecurity programs, knowing the reality surrounding your flocks. Um, when was it? A couple of months ago, I was in Guatemala checking some broiler breeders, and the history was coryza, persistent coryza outbreaks. And then I take a shower, right? Change clothes completely, strip, take showers, fumigation after you go
Right.
into that shower,
Fogging you.
and then your skin is cracking, right? And you feel
Yeah.
like you need to go home and stuff. And all of a sudden, I take a look across the fencing, super good fencing, right? I mean, prime biosecurity if you look at it. And then across the fence, I see some cages. And then I go like, well, those are cages. They look like chicken cages. And then I go peek into the premise on the other side, and there were fighting birds, fighting cocks.
Oh,
And from my experience here in California, in Southern California, fighting cocks get
they're loaded.
loads and loads of coryza.
Yeah. If they survive, they're just carriers. They're just toting it around.
There you go. So
Yeah.
so part of my other life here is to is to provide help and training to gamefowl breeders
Right.
to reduce the incidence of Newcastle disease virus. So we don't want Newcastle disease virus to come.
No.
So we train them on biosecurity and disease prevention, and also we help them vaccinate. The other disease that they need to be vaccinated against is coryza. So we're looking into options of having a killed Newcastle coryza that we
Oh, a
can
combination product. You can give
incorporate
them
into
twice.
into their vaccine programs. So
They're
yeah,
great.
so
They're very valuable birds. It would make sense to heavily vaccinate them.
they are very valuable. It's so tied to their own culture that
Oh,
they won't
very
stop doing it.
loyal. Right.
Even if you go and kill all the birds, they will keep doing it.
They'll be right back.
So it's part of what we need to do in a university if we get paid by tax dollars, right? I mean, provide information and training to the people that needs it.
That's, I knew following the last sort of Newcastle break in California, there was a lot of outreach effort into that, that sort of I mean, it is an industry, and we
It is
need to
an
treat it
industry,
like
and
one.
actually,
Yeah.
so when I started working on this is a subset of the last outbreak that we had. USDA wanted to have a program in order to talk with these people, train them, and also vaccinate. And I've been learning a little bit of how they do it. And these birds fly across the U.S. There's a lot of breeder farms in Alabama, in Georgia, and I started looking at the boxes, transport boxes, when they receive them, and they come from all sort of places. So
Yeah, we do. There's a lot of and you'll see them. You'll see the breeders, like you'll drive by. They either have like the little kind of V tents or those blue barrels, and create. They have tethers, and yes, I've
and
seen.
sometimes it's a backyard that can be the size of my office with
Right.
2,000 birds.
Yes, they're crammed in there. It is. It cannot be. Yeah, they are harboring
You
all
tell
kinds
them
of
like you need to
diseases.
vaccinate ocularly, and they look at you like, "How do you want me to
How am I going to
vaccinate
do
all
that?
this? I don't even know how many birds I have." So,
Right.
job security.
That's right. That's right. That gives us good job security. Yes. You can become that industry's, personal veterinarian.
Yeah, no, it's not in my list of things to do, but
Right. I know. Yeah.
if I
No,
can
but
contribute,
it's a definite part of, yeah. Yeah. And the same for even, small producers and backyard producers. I think you have several niche kind of markets within California. A lot of things feed into the different cultural markets in LA and San Francisco, and you have a lot of different poultry production that supports that. So you have a lot of opportunities to keep you busy, Rodrigo,
oh yeah,
in California.
it's interesting down here. I wish I could have someone to collaborate,
Right.
right?
You need more than just you. I understand that. I understand. That's right. It takes an army.
It's time for our famous three. Working with nature and not against it. Chickens fed AX3 Digest consume significantly less feed and water to produce 1 pound of meat. Successful flock performance is determined during the first 10 days post-placement. AX3 Digest is a highly digestible novel protein that most improved in barn performance, bird health, and a drier litter. For more information, visit www.protecta.com. Evonik stands for a holistic and sustainable value proposition for livestock production. It combines products and services and leverages digital solutions. This is all backed with high-value consultancy and deep customer understanding. Evonik turns science-based efficient nutrition, sustainable healthy nutrition, and precision livestock farming into value for customers and consumers.
Well, I think we've kind of covered good science subjects. So let's venture off into maybe unusual questions to ask here to wrap us up. What kind of things do you do as hobbies? What do you do for fun?
Oh, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting that one.
Oh, well,
So,
we usually talk about books. We could talk about books that you like or recommend. Which would you prefer?
funny enough, I don't read much. I read a lot of technical stuff. I cannot read. If you give me a book, I'll fall asleep. So I
Okay,
do,
noted. It's not
yeah.
your thing.
I do snowboard in winter. I do
Oh,
downhill biking in summer. I have a car that I like working on. All those things that you do and that you feel adrenaline, I kind of like.
oh, I don't drink.
And I
Now
have
I
little
see.
kids
Now
that
I
keep
see.
me super busy.
Right, right. That's awesome. And then I know that you've had a strong group of graduate students that have come in, and you're a great mentor to those students. If there's people listening that are in virology programs or they're interested, what kind of advice do you have them in terms of finding a similar path to sort of what the area you work in and diagnostic virology and being a PhD researcher?
I think I think part of doing research and or in any job that you take as a goal, I mean it's using your time and try to explore different things. There's beauty in everything you do, but you need to dedicate some time to it. And that doesn't mean 24/7 days, but it means dedicating your time to the things that you most like, and then finding inside those things what it's most interesting to you. uh, yes, I work on virology, but I have the viruses that I like the most, and with those I enjoy my work, right? I mean, um, these are things that we take and that we decide to do, and we will be doing for 15, 20, 30 years of your life. So if you don't feel excited when you are doing your job, or if you don't enjoy what you do during the day, it's super difficult to do it well. So I would encourage people to look into the things that they most like and try to dedicate some time of their lives to something that they enjoy doing.
Perfect. That's a great message to end on.
Thank you.
Excellent. No, it's not work if you enjoy it.
I mean, there's extra things, right? I mean, there's people that you cannot get along with, or
Right.
institutions
That's
that
anything.
don't. Yeah, but that happens. That happens everywhere. But if you're doing what you like, I mean, that's you cannot pay for that. That's something that keeps you going. That there's nothing worse of waking up in the morning and not willing to go to work.
Well, excellent. Any other pieces of information you'd like to share on what you do or
No, not really. I mean, if anybody's interested in what we do, please contact me. My information is on the web.
Excellent. Yes, you can find them in the UC Davis. Go through the College of Veterinary Medicine, and you can find Dr. Gallardo there. And thanks for your time, Rodrigo. It was great speaking with you. And tune in next time to the next episode. Thanks.
Thank you.